Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we're going to be doing another tier list for Deep Rock Galactic. This one is going to be talking about the active and passive perks. And if you've been on my channel before, you might know that I already have an active and a passive tier list video for both of these. But my opinions have changed on some of these. I don't think any of them have been changed dramatically since I made those videos. I think they've had minor tweaks, usually just bug fixes in the way that they work. But I would still like to do a full list talking about all of these just in one list and telling you if my opinion has changed on these from where I put them before. So let's go through them and talk about each of them. These are just in the order, I think, alphabetically. Oh, also anybody that's new to Deep Rock Galactic, you can have up to 3 passive perks on a character and 2 active perks. This will come depending on how many times you promoted your dwarf. So starting out, we have Beastmaster. Beastmaster allows you to tame 1 grunt and have it fight for you. This just gets better the more that you put points into it. So at tier 1, it's just you get the grunt. It does no bonus damage or anything like that. It's just the grunt that's there to be an active target. Now this works on regular grunts, slashers, and grunt guards. The guards and the slashers are going to be the ones that you want to get. Slashers will do the most damage as well as can stun, or at least kind of concuss enemies to slow them down. And guards just have the most health as well as they have heavy armor on the front half of them. So they'll survive the longest. Regular grunts are still usable on lower ranks, but they're not really that great at higher ranks. So the main strength of Beastmaster is that you get another friendly ally to be taking damage from other bugs. I find that Beastmaster is best used on both Scout and Engineer. Gunner and Driller don't usually get that much of a bonus from it. Scout because you're likely going to need extra ammunition, so having something to clean up small enemies is kind of useful. And Engineer because you can't move very quickly, so having as many targets that aren't trying to attack you is better for you. There is some downside to having a Steve running around. Teammates might not know what it's about, although teammate damage does reduce damage to Steve. It only does 2% damage, which is pretty nice. Although status effects can hurt him more still. So things like radiation or fire will damage him a bit more. So you don't want to be doing that. That's also a reason why you usually don't want to be taking him with Driller, especially if you're running the Flamethrower. It's just too easy to hit your Steve then. Steve can get in the way. He can kind of block you from being able to activate things, and you have to pet Steve, which is the most annoying part about having a Steve, especially if you have multiple Steves. But overall, Beastmaster is still a pretty strong perk. I would say I put it a bit higher than it really is in my first list. I put it in A tier originally. I think it's more like a B tier perk. It's all around pretty solid and it will help, but it's not super necessary on everybody. I would say it might be an A tier perk on like Engineer, but everybody else, it's not as useful. Our second active perk here is Berserker. So you can activate Berserker by using multiple power attacks in a row. And Berserker allows you to use as many power attacks as you would like within the amount of time that you get to use it, which I believe is 10 seconds. You can use this to clear crowds out pretty easily. Every time you upgrade Berserker, it just reduces the cooldown of how long it takes for it to come back up. Lowest is 4 minutes, the highest is 10 minutes, so you want to get this down quicker if you want to use it. It can be really good on certain classes that can clear up waves quicker. It's really good on Scout. It can be pretty good on Engineer as well. Again, Driller and Gunner don't necessarily need it. It's not a bad one on either of those classes, but it is stronger on the other two. Just because those classes don't have as good a wave clear as the other. This can also be used for killing large targets too, which can be really useful. If you can get behind an Oppressor, if you can get behind a Dreadnought and are allowed to hit it, if you can get behind a Praetorian, you can kill them very quickly with Berserker. Berserker is all around a pretty strong perk, and I'm going to put Berserker into A tier. I put it in A tier before, I believe, and it still belongs there. I still have the same opinion about it. It's a good perk on really any class. Better on certain classes. I think it might be the strongest on Scout. Alright, moving on, we have Born Ready. This is a passive perk, and this makes it so when you have your weapons unequipped, they will automatically reload after a certain amount of time, depending on the tier that you have. Starts out at 15 seconds, and it goes all the way down to 5 seconds. With certain weapons, this actually is faster than just reloading them, like the autocannon for Gunner, because it already has a 5-second reload. You can get away with reload canceling, so you can reduce that more than 5 seconds, but it's still the same practical amount of time. I put Born Ready actually kind of low when I was first doing the list. I put it in something like C tier. This is a very basic perk, but it is a very strong perk, especially on higher difficulties, I've noticed. Once you're getting into like Hazard 5, Born Ready is really solid. It works well on Gunner, so long as you're taking the autocannon. If you're taking the minigun, not so much. It works really well on Engineer no matter what loadout you're taking. It works really well on Scout no matter what loadout you're taking. And it works okay on Driller so long as you're taking the Flamethrower. This can also reload equipment as well, so this goes for the Flare Gun for Scout or the Platform Gun for Engineer, the Zipline Gun for Gunner. I would definitely put Born Ready higher than I did before. I put it in C tier saying that it was kind of good on certain classes, but not the best. I kind of take that back and say that it's quite good on most classes. Not all builds, but most classes, and I would put it probably into lower A tier. It's still not like an S tier perk in my opinion, because it doesn't just go for everybody, and you kind of have to build a loadout around it, but it can be really strong with those loadouts that you build around it. Alright, I now notice that these are not in alphabetical order, just the first three were. Our next one up is It's a Bug Thing. This one makes it so if you're within a certain range of loot bugs, they will automatically explode. 2 meters or 5 meters depending on the rank. This is another passive perk, and this one, even the developers have said, it's pretty much a meme perk. It's not actually for real use. It's just, you know, if you have an extra spot and you don't know what to throw on it, you can toss this in. The one class you can kind of make a case for is running this with Scout, but that's really not necessary. Loot bugs should never be giving you issues. You're going to be able to kill them very easily. So having It's a Bug Thing is usually more of a hindrance than a help, and it's going into D tier because it's just a meme perk. If you want to take it and you have, you know, the two main passive perks you want, then by all means take it. Otherwise, there's no reason to. Our next one up is another active perk. This one is Dash. And I put Dash, I believe, in B tier before, and my opinion has changed quite a bit about this one too. This makes it so if you double tap shift, then you will take off sprinting in whatever direction you ran. This goes for a few seconds, maybe 2.5 seconds of the dash, and then it goes on cooldown. This does have a low cooldown once it's maxed out. At tier 1, it has a 40-second cooldown. At tier 4, it has a 25-second cooldown. So it comes up very often, and this is pretty much your get-out-of-jail-free card in a way. You activate it and you can run through crowds. You can also run through stuns and you can run through webs with this. The stun effect and the web effect will still persist after the dash, assuming you got hit directly with it and it didn't wear off during the dash. But the dash helps you get away from bad situations, and it is really, really strong on the higher difficulties. For most classes. I would say the one class that doesn't need dash, or the one class that doesn't need to rely on dash to get away from situations, is Scout. I usually don't run dash on Scout, but I do run it on Driller, Engineer, and Gunner pretty often. It helps me get through quite a few situations. Driller, you don't necessarily need it either. I have found just drilling into the walls and then being able to either freeze or burn all the enemies works just fine, so they are an exception to this. Even on Hazard 5, I haven't needed dash on the Driller, but it does feel really good as a backup, or if you get trapped in a weird position. So dash is just always useful on pretty much anybody except for Scout in certain instances, especially if you're running like full cooldown grappling hook Scout. Then it's not really as helpful, but it can still be quite helpful for them too. So I'm going to put dash up into S tier. It is a very simple perk, but it's a very strong perk. Alright, our next passive perk is Deep Pockets. This just makes it so we can hold more valuables. 5, 10, or 15 extra valuables. This counts for everything of gold, nitra, any sort of valuable material like Bismore or Umanite or anything like that. This one is a very nice quality of life perk. It's not really necessary. I run it pretty much all the time on Scout because I'm going to be moving around the map so easy and can get so much materials. I've heard a lot of people really like it on Driller too. I don't usually use it on Driller, and I don't usually use it on Engineer or Gunner really that much at all. On Scout, though, I absolutely love it, and it's just a nice quality of life perk. I think that Deep Pockets is probably in the low end of B tier to the high end of C tier. I think that's where I put it last time, too, and I still stand by that. It's not needed by everybody. It's just really useful to have for, like, one person on the team to have it, or if you're doing this solo as Scout or something. Solo, you also don't necessarily need it because some of your other passives might be a little bit more useful. Our next passive perk is Elemental Insulation. This just makes it so we take reduced damage from elemental effects. Up to 30% at max, 20% at the lowest. This works on radiation, poison gas, freezing, and explosion damage, kind of. It depends on which enemy is dealing that to you. Things like the bulk detonator's fire will count towards this, but the explosion won't. There's a lot of things that don't necessarily count towards this, like a goo bomber spitting directly at you, or like the menace's shot shooting at you will not count for it. But this does help quite a lot, especially on certain maps, like in the Fungus Bog, where you have poison damage that can be causing problems, or in the Magma Core, where you can be getting burned a lot. I did put this in S tier, and I still think it belongs probably in S tier because it's valuable on everybody. Certain maps not as much, and certain classes not as much, depending on which map you're going on. But it still is a very solid choice, and I would still put it in S tier. I'd put it in lower S tier than what I put it before, because I before said it was probably the best perk in the game, and it's still one of the strongest ones. It's a really good one to toss on any class if you don't know what to toss on as your second or third passive perk, but it's not always necessary. Alright, our next passive perk is Veteran Depositor. This makes it so we deposit faster. 20% all the way up to 50% faster, and we also get damage reduction when we're standing within 7 meters of Molly. Or deposit points in general. So this also counts for like the mining rigs in certain areas. The 30% damage reduction can be pretty good, especially if you want to hug by them. The extra deposit speed is kind of nice, but it's not really that necessary. I don't find myself running this one a whole lot on most of the classes. I found it probably the most useful on Engineer because it's easy to set up and stay in an area with Engineer. You can do it with Gunner too because of their shield. Both those I've found to have pretty decent success with. I really don't run it with Scout because I'm moving so much, and with Driller I didn't find it super useful either. I'd probably put this one into C tier because it is a bonus, but it's not a huge bonus for a lot of classes. Our next active and also sort of passive perk is Field Medic. Field Medic makes it so that you can res teammates faster passively. You will always be able to res teammates faster, going from 15% all the way up to 30% faster than you normally would be able to. And for one time only, you can activate this to instantly res a teammate up off the ground. This is still probably one of the best perks, if not the best perk overall in the game. It's very useful for at least 1 or 2 people to be running this. It works well on any class, but it works the best on Scout and Gunner. Gunner because you have your shield so that you can pick up people very safely, and if you need to instant res you can. And Scout because you have the most mobility so you can easily get to down teammates to pick them up. So I would still highly recommend Field Medic, and I would still put it up into S tier, probably on the same level as Dash. Those two in combination have saved me a lot of times, and I really enjoy running both these in combination, especially with somebody like Gunner. Our next active perk is Iron Will. Iron Will makes it so once you go down, you can activate this to get yourself back up. And then the duration that you're left standing depends on what level it is. At the lowest, it's 6 seconds. At the highest, it's 12 seconds. So you get 12 more seconds of life where you have all of your weapons instantly reloaded upon doing this. And you can actually save yourself from going down again with Iron Will. You can use this to go and get red sugar and you'll get the health back. You are completely immune to damage while Iron Will is going. So you can take that opportunity to kill as many bugs as you can while still trying to heal. You can also heal with the passive perk Vampire, which we're going to talk about later down the line. So there is ways of getting yourself up. This is also a very good clutch perk to save teammates as well. Especially if you're running Field Medic, you can usually pick up 2 Dwarves, assuming they died very close to one another with this. And it's always useful to have somebody running Iron Will on the team. I would put Iron Will probably up into A tier, high A tier, because it is so useful. It's not entirely necessary. And I would still say something like Field Medic is probably going to give you more benefit than Iron Will, but there are those cases where Iron Will really comes in clutch and makes it so that you can finish the mission effectively. Up next is Heightened Senses. Heightened Senses makes it so you get 1 to 2 free escapes from grabs. These can be used on anything that can grab you. So grabbers, cave leeches, or the trawlers. Any of them that grab hold of you, you can hold to activate this, and it will kill them. It goes on cooldown after that. When it's maxed out, it's only a 5-second cooldown, so you'll likely be able to use it quickly after that, assuming you're not instantly grabbed by another grabber or another cave leech or something. This also has a passive on it, where it will light up your screen if there is anything trying to grab you. I would definitely recommend Heightened Senses to newer players, because newer players generally don't look for leeches or look for grabbers or anything like that. Even more experienced players don't always look for them anyway, but this will give them an early warning as well as some escapes. So if they do wander off by themselves and a leech happens to grab them, you can use this and save yourself. Heightened Senses is always a pretty solid perk to take, even if you don't need it, because there's always that off chance that you will need it. I would probably put it somewhere into the middle of B tier. It's still a very good perk overall. It's not necessary to take all the time. If you see cave leech clusters, though, it's probably good to have at least 1 or 2 people running Heightened Senses, just so that if you do happen to get a room that has multiple leeches, your whole team doesn't just die. Our next passive perk is Friendly. Friendly makes it so you take 50% reduced damage from teammates shooting you, and your teammates take 50% damage from you shooting them. So Friendly can be really useful. I find it pretty helpful if I'm playing in not necessarily lower hazard difficulties, but around Hazard 3, Hazard 4, where I have teammates that are still fairly new, and they tend to be shooting me pretty often. This can help quite a bit. It's also useful if you have teammates that constantly jump in front of you. It's not needed, though. It's not something that you want to rely on. It's better just to not be shooting your friends as often. I know that can be sometimes difficult, especially if you have somebody dancing on the end of your gun or something, but it is just generally better to try to get better and try not to hit your teammates and hit your allies. So every once in a while I will throw on Friendly, and it does spare me a couple hits, but it's not something I really rely on to where my teammates are just constantly shooting me. So I'm going to put Friendly in the middle to the low end of C tier. Hopefully you don't need it, but it still can come in handy in like public matches. Our next passive perk here is Sweet Tooth. Sweet Tooth gives you more health every time that you get health from red sugar. Once it's maxed out, you'll get 30% more health than you normally would per hit, as well as you'll get 20% bonus movement speed for 10 seconds. This one is pretty much always a good one. It works well on everybody. It works especially well on Scout because you can more easily get to harder to reach red sugars. It can also be pretty good on Gunner because you can shoot down red sugars. And you're just going to be usually at higher health most of the time. So it's always going to help you. It makes it so you can make better uses of the resources that you're given on any given map. And there's no real downside to running Sweet Tooth. I would probably put Sweet Tooth at the very high end of B tier, because, again, it's not really necessary, especially if your team's getting resupplies fairly often, fairly efficiently. It's not a bad perk if you want to take it for running any of the achievements for just not calling in a resupply, because that will probably be the way that you get health back, is just by using it. And it's just always going to be a pretty solid perk. It's either high B tier or low A tier for me. I might put it in low A tier, because it's always a good choice. Our next passive perk is Resupplier. Resupplier makes it so every time we interact with a resupply pod, we get more out of it. We can interact with it faster as well. At max, it's 50% faster than it would normally be, as well as we get extra health from it. This one is also not a bad choice. This is similar to Veteran Depositor, where it does give you a bonus, but it's not always a huge bonus. If you're constantly getting resupplies and you notice that you're not at 30% health or less, you're probably not going to see that much of a difference in getting the resupply. I would put Resupplier still probably in the high end of C tier. It's very much like Veteran Depositor. It can be useful. It's a nice quality of life bonus, but it's not needed on really any class. Up next is Second Wind. Second Wind makes it so after you've been sprinting for 5 seconds, or at the lowest 4 seconds, then you get a speed boost. 8% at the lowest, 12% at the highest. This one is another nice quality of life perk. I think I put this one rather high the first time I did lists, and honestly, I don't think it's as useful as I said it was. It can be pretty good on classes that don't have high mobility. So like Driller, Gunner, Engineer, pretty much anybody that's not Scout, it's pretty decent on. Those ones get a little bit of bonus from it, especially on lower difficulties. This one's better on like Hazard 3 and lower. On Hazard 4 and 5, the bugs tend to be able to catch up to you even with this, and it's just usually not as useful as running Dash. Now you could run these in combination, and I have done that. I do that all the time with Engineer, and it's a pretty solid combination. I think I'm going to put Second Wind in the low end of B tier, because it is useful all the time that you have it. It's just, it's not always like a needed or a go-to one for me anymore. So I think Second Wind belongs in B tier. Next, we got another active perk. This is See You in Hell, which this is arguably one of the funnest perks to be running in this game. See You in Hell makes it so right after an enemy melee attacks you, you get a temporary melee bonus. That's its passive that it gets, which can actually be pretty useful. I like running this one with Gunner, or I like running this one with Driller, and running it with Vampire and running it with the Barbed Drills as well as the Cryo Gun. It's kind of a whole setup for a build. It actually works pretty well then for that. For everybody else, the passive bonus melee damage isn't super great, but it is something, and it's kind of useful if you run it with Berserker in combination. Again, you can have some synergies with this, but it's not necessary. The active on this makes it so you can use it 3 times each time when you go down. You can set out a pulse that does damage to all enemies around you. This does have a cooldown. You can't be using this every time, like you can't go down 3 times really quickly. It has to have a 1 minute cooldown at the lowest. So there is some downsides to this. I did put See You in Hell kind of low before. I think I put it in like B tier, and honestly I think it still kind of belongs in B tier. It works well if you build a whole build around it. But if you just take it as a regular perk, it can still work decently well, because even the best player is still going to go down on the higher difficulties. That's just what happens in this game. You may just get unfortunate. You may just get swarmed out of nowhere. You may just not be paying attention, or you have to go AFK or whatever. See You in Hell at least gives you something to do once you do go down. So it's never going to be a bad option, but it's never a top tier choice in my opinion. Our next active perk is Shield Link. Shield Link makes it so you supercharge a teammate's shield. Also, whenever you're within 4 meters of another teammate, both you and them get a faster recharge rate on their shield. It recharges 50% faster, which is really useful. This one is fantastic on lower hazard levels, and something I would definitely recommend to beginners, because it just allows you to tank so much more damage through your shield, especially if you're taking another perk like Sweet Tooth. Then you have a lot of sustain. You're not going down that often. Its active has a 30-second duration with a 2-minute cooldown on it at the highest, and this makes it so you overcharge your teammate's shield by 300% for up to 30 seconds. Your teammate does have to be within that 4 meters though for you to use the active perk. 300% might sound like a lot, but when most of the time your shield is only sitting at 25 or at 30, it's honestly not as much damage reduction as you would think. But even on the higher difficulties like Hazard 5, you can usually tank through a couple of hits if a teammate does give you Shield Link. So it's never going to be a bad choice. It's very similar to like See You in Hell, and I think I'd also probably put this somewhere into B tier, because it is always going to be a bonus, but it shouldn't be something that you rely on. The next passive perk is Strong Arm. Strong Arm makes it so that you can throw flares and objects further. When it's maxed out, it's 50% further, and when it's larger objects, you can throw them 20% further. Throwing larger objects can be pretty useful in certain missions. It's not necessary in every mission though, and throwing flares further can actually be really good. I did put this one kind of low before, saying that it wasn't all that useful, and I still think it's kind of a niche perk, so I would still probably put this low, but I'm going to put it at the high end of C tier. Our last active perk on this list is Hover Boots, and Hover Boots is another kind of niche active perk. This makes it so you can activate the Hover Boots to hover in the air at the lowest 2 seconds, at the highest 3.5 seconds, and this has a 75-second cooldown at the highest. So Hover Boots usually is used to not take fall damage, and for that it can be very useful. It's also a very beginner-friendly perk. Hover Boots can be a really good option. That way you're just not taking damage. You can also use Hover Boots to damage enemies that are directly beneath you. That's pretty niche. You're not going to be using that a whole lot for any sort of like serious fighting or anything. It doesn't give you a massive amount of damage or a massive advantage against most enemies. And if you're taking a lot of fall damage, which according to Ghost Ship, the people that actually made the game, fall damage is the main thing that kills people in this. Hover Boots could be really useful for you. For everybody else, I again would say it's not that necessary. I haven't really changed my opinion on Hover Boots. I think it's still probably C tier. It's okay, but not needed once you stop falling to your death, or don't fall to your death as often, which I know can be easier said than done. Even for experienced players, you will still probably fall to your death a couple of times and wish that you had Hover Boots. Our next passive perk is Thorns. Thorns just makes it so when enemies hit you, they take damage in return. 6 damage at lowest, 24 damage at highest. If you have it to at least tier 3, you will be able to kill any of the crawlers, the swarmers on any difficulty, which is pretty useful. This can't trigger one right after another hit though. It has to take a 3/4 of a second cooldown. So if you have a bunch of swarmers hitting you all at once, they won't just die. You'll kill the first 1 or 2, however many it counts as being the first ones to hit you. But then you'll get hit by the next ones, and then it has to reset for them to die again. Thorns can be incredibly useful on certain classes. I find it very useful on Engineer and very useful on Scout. On Gunner and Driller, I almost never use it because the autocannon and the flamethrower or the cryo cannon just get rid of swarms so quickly that Thorns doesn't give me that much use. But on the other classes, I find this to be extremely useful and one of the better passives. I would probably put this one up into A tier. I don't really see any downsides to taking Thorns on anybody other than, like I said, you don't really need it on Driller or Gunner. Up next is Unstoppable. Unstoppable makes it so the environmental slowdown of certain things like goo or like frost or sand do not affect you as much. You can also carry heavy objects faster. Now, carrying heavy objects faster can be useful, but it's also not the most useful thing in the world because you can usually throw the objects further quicker. So if you have to move things around, it might be better just to go with strong arm at that point. The environmental reduction can be pretty useful in certain areas. The Glacial Biodome as well as the swamp in the fungus bog, both those that have a lot of slowdown mechanics. This one can be pretty good on, but it's again another one that's not really necessary for anybody. And I would probably put this also somewhere into C tier. It's an okay perk, but again, not a amazing choice. And then our last passive perk is Vampire. Vampire makes it so whenever you kill a medium-sized enemy with a melee attack, you will get health back. At the lowest, it's 2 health back. At the highest, it's 5 health back. Usually, Vampire is honestly not a great choice to be taking on most classes because the health regen is just so low that on higher difficulties, you're likely just going to be getting hurt more often. If you're trying to use Vampire on Tier 5, I really only use it on Driller. That's about the only class that I can effectively use it on. Every other class, usually not so much. Because even if just a grunt decides to hit me, it's pretty much nearly broken my shield or has broken my shield and is hitting health. So getting that 5 health back, it usually isn't worth it. On lower difficulties, that might not be the case. If you're playing below Hazard 3 or so, then I imagine Vampire will work really well for you. I usually don't play on that difficulty, but I have no reason to see why it wouldn't work well, where your shield can take a couple hits, and you might be able to get a pickaxe swing in to kill him. This works extremely well with Driller, as I said, because you can freeze enemies, and you can smash them then, either with your drills, or with your pickaxe, or with your impact axes. All of those count as melee weapons. That's also kind of another reason why it works so well with Driller. You can immobilize targets as well as kill them easily with melee because you have so many melee options. For everybody else, though, it's a pretty weak skill. For Driller in particular, I would probably put this into A tier, but for every other perk, I'd probably put it into C tier. So I'll make a compromise and put it somewhere into the middle of B tier. You can kind of run it on Scout. I've done that before, running Vampire, Berserker, and it works out okay. But it's still not as consistent as like Driller. If you're running Driller, then Vampire's pretty strong, assuming you're running the cryo gun and running the barb drills. Very strong then. If you're not, it can still be strong on Driller, even if you're running the flamethrower, because you do have the impact axes, you can still get health back from them. You can still always power attack. So it's still decent then. For everybody else, it's not that great. It's kind of mediocre. So this is where I would place all of the perks in Deep Rock Galactic currently. The only bad one I would say is the meme one that the developers even said was a meme one. So kind of makes sense as to why it's not that great. There's a couple S tier ones and there's some pretty solid ones overall. I have changed my opinion on a couple of these, as you can kind of see from the tier list before, and I think this better reflects how I feel about them now. Tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. I would really be interested to hear them as to where you guys would place some of these. If you're new here and you haven't already, be sure that you get subscribed. That way you get notifications whenever I post any of these videos. Thank you guys so very much for watching it. I really do appreciate it, and I will talk to all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool, and bye.